Footsteps echoed through Memorial Presbyterian's trauma bay, entirely too frantic for a Tuesday at 3 a.m. Protocol dictates that a nurse never overrides an attending physician. Breaking that rule means losing your license, your career, and your reputation. Abigail broke it anyway. She just wanted to save a life. Memorial Presbyterian Hospital was a sprawling, sterile monolith in the heart of Chicago's West Side. At 3:14 a.m., the emergency room was a purgatory of fluorescent lights, the smell of cheap coffee, and the ceaseless rhythmic pinging of cardiac monitors. Abigail Linville, a senior trauma nurse with 8 years of grit under her belt, scrubbed her hands at the stainless steel sink. Her scrubs were already stained from a multi-car pileup 2 hours earlier. She was exhausted, running on fumes and sheer adrenaline, but her shift was far from over. The double doors of the ambulance bay slammed open with a concussive bang. Paramedics barreled through, their boots squeaking wildly against the linoleum. Between them, they guided a gurney carrying a man who looked like he had been dragged behind a freight train. "John Doe, found unresponsive in an alley off Kinsey Street," shouted paramedic David Miller, his face flushed with exertion. Massive blunt force trauma to the abdomen, multiple lacerations, hypertensive. BP is hanging by a thread at 70/40, heart rate is 140 and climbing. We lost his airway twice in the rig. Abigail was at the gurney before the wheels stopped spinning. The patient was a mess. He was stripped of whatever coat or jacket he might have been wearing, clad only in a torn, muddy undershirt and soaking wet slacks. His face was unrecognizable beneath a mask of swelling and bruising, his dark hair matted to his forehead. But it was his abdomen that drew Abigail's immediate terrifying focus. It was distended, rigid as a plank of wood, a textbook sign of catastrophic internal bleeding. "Get him to Bay 4, Abigail ordered, grabbing a pair of trauma shears and cutting away the remains of his shirt. "I need 2 large-bore IVs, stat. Someone page Dr. Gregory." As the team transferred the John Doe onto the hospital bed, Abigail connected the cardiac leads. The monitor instantly protested, flashing angry red numbers. The man was bleeding out, dying right in front of them, his organs suffocating from a lack of oxygenated blood. Dr. Simon Gregory strolled into Bay 4 3 minutes later, holding a half-empty cup of espresso. Gregory was an attending physician whose ambition far outstripped his bedside manner. He was a man who preferred treating the city's elite, donors, politicians, board members, while treating the uninsured, unidentified masses as an unfortunate nuisance that took up his valuable time. "What do we have, Linville?" Gregory asked, not bothering to step closer to the bed. He took a sip of his espresso, eyeing the mud and the mess with visible distaste. "John Doe, massive abdominal trauma, likely a ruptured spleen or a lacerated liver," Abigail replied, her hands working furiously as she secured an IV line. "He's severely hypovolemic. I need orders for uncross-matched O-negative blood, a massive transfusion protocol, and an immediate surgical consult. We need to get him up to the OR right now." Gregory sighed, checking his pristine wristwatch. "Linville, look at him. He's a transient. He reeks of alley water and cheap booze. His pupils are sluggish. He's probably high on whatever fentanyl cocktail is making the rounds this week. Push 2 liters of normal saline. If his pressure doesn't come up, we're not wasting limited O-negative supply on a hopeless case. I have Alderman Gable's daughter in Bay 1 complaining of a migraine, and her father is on the hospital board." Abigail froze, the IV tubing slipping from her gloved fingers. She stared at the attending physician, entirely unable to comprehend the callousness of his words. "Dr. Gregory, saline is just going to dilute whatever clotting factors he has left. He will bleed to death in the next 10 minutes. We have to initiate the MTP. "I gave you an order, Nurse Linville," Gregory snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous authoritarian timbre. "Normal saline, nothing else. Do not page surgery for a homeless overdose. You know the hospital's current protocols on blood conservation. I'll be in Bay 1. Do not interrupt me." He turned and walked out. The curtain swished shut behind him, leaving Abigail in a terrifying vacuum of authority. The monitor screamed. The man's blood pressure plummeted to 50/30. His breathing became a wet, shallow rattle. He was slipping into irreversible shock. Abigail looked down at the man's bruised, battered face. Beneath the dirt and swelling, there was a strange stillness to him. He wasn't a transient. The fabric of his torn trousers, though ruined, was a custom-woven wool. The watch missing from his wrist had left a tan line that suggested something large and expensive. But none of that mattered. He was a human being, and he was dying. Memorial Presbyterian's Employee Handbook, Section 4, Paragraph 2 echoed in her mind. Under no circumstances shall nursing staff initiate critical, life-altering interventions or dispense controlled biologics without explicit documented authorization from the attending physician. Abigail gritted her teeth. To hell with Section 4. Stay with me, Abigail whispered to the unconscious man. She bolted out of Bay 4 and sprinted to the blood bank terminal. She didn't have the authorization codes, but she knew that Dr. Timothy Harper, a second-year resident who was currently upstairs in the cafeteria, always used his birth year and his dog's name as his password. With trembling fingers, Abigail logged into the system under Harper's credentials. Harper T_92_Buster. She smashed the enter key. The system granted her access. She bypassed the standard requisition forms, hitting the emergency override for the massive transfusion protocol. 90 seconds later, she was running back down the hall with 2 coolers containing 4 units of O-negative blood, fresh frozen plasma and platelets. She also grabbed a vial of tranexamic acid to help his blood clot. She bypassed the normal saline entirely. She spiked the blood bags, hooked them up to a rapid infuser, and cranked the machine to the maximum flow rate. The thick, dark red blood raced down the tubing and into the dying man's veins. "Come on," Abigail muttered, her eyes locked on the monitor. "Come back." She worked in a blur of desperate, insubordinate efficiency. She administered the clotting agents. She manually bagged him, forcing pure oxygen into his failing lungs. For 8 agonizing minutes, it was a tug-of-war with the Grim Reaper. Slowly, impossibly, the angry red numbers on the monitor began to climb. The blood pressure crept up to 85/55, then 90/60. The man's heart rate steadied. The colour, ever so faintly, began to return to his pale, drawn lips. He was stabilizing. She had actually done it. She had pulled him back from the absolute brink. And then the curtain to Bay 4 was violently ripped open. Dr. Simon Gregory stood frozen in the entryway, his eyes darting from the empty coolers of O-negative blood to the rapid infuser, and finally settling on Abigail. The colour drained from his face, swiftly replaced by a mottled, furious red. "What in the name of God have you done?" Gregory hissed, his voice trembling with rage. Abigail didn't back down. She stood tall beside the gurney. "I saved his life. His pressure is holding at 95/65. He's stable enough for transport. Now I suggest you page the surgical team before he starts bleeding again." Gregory stepped into the bay, jabbing a finger toward her face. "You overrode my direct orders. You stole hospital property. You accessed a restricted biological supply without attending authorization. You're completely out of your mind, Linville." "He was coding, Simon," Abigail shot back, dropping the formalities. "You left him here to die because he didn't have a donor placard on his chest." "He is a nobody," Gregory roared, losing the last shred of his professional composure. "And you are a liability. You don't make the calls in this hospital. I do." He turned toward the hallway. "Security. Get security down here immediately." Within moments, 2 large hospital security guards, men Abigail had shared donuts and coffee with on slow nights, appeared at the curtain. They looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight as they took in the scene. "Escort Nurse Linville off the premises," Gregory ordered, his chest heaving. "She's terminated, effective immediately. And Linville? You can expect a formal complaint filed with the State Board of Nursing by 9 o'clock this morning. You will never work in a hospital in this state again. Now get her out of my ER." Abigail felt a cold, hollow pit open in her stomach. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a profound, terrifying reality. She had massive student loans. She paid for her mother's assisted living facility. Her career wasn't just her passion, it was her entire lifeline. She looked back at the John Doe. He was breathing steadily now, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest a testament to her insubordination. "He needs surgery," she said quietly, her voice devoid of the earlier fire. "Get out," Gregory sneered. Abigail stripped off her bloody gloves, tossing them into the biohazard bin. She didn't look at the security guards as she walked past them. She walked to her locker, grabbed her coat, and stepped out into the freezing Chicago morning. The rain was beginning to fall, washing away the grime of the city, but it did nothing to wash away the crushing weight of what she had just lost. 9 hours later, the atmosphere inside Memorial Presbyterian had violently shifted from routine chaos to absolute terror. It started with the arrival of 3 black armoured SUVs pulling directly into the ambulance bay, blocking it entirely. 6 men stepped out. They were wearing tailored charcoal suits, and they moved with a precise military synchronization that sent a shiver down the spine of the triage nurses. At their head was Dominic Rousseau. Dominic was a man whose reputation preceded him in certain, powerful circles. He was the head of security and operations for the Croft Syndicate, a legitimate multi-billion-dollar enterprise that owned half the commercial real estate in the city, held the dockworker unions in an iron grip, and quietly funded the campaigns of the mayor, the police commissioner, and the governor. Dominic didn't stop at the triage desk. He walked straight through the double doors, his men fanning out behind him, effectively locking down the emergency room. "I am looking for a man," Dominic said, his voice quiet but carrying a lethal edge that cut through the noise of the ER. He was brought in last night by paramedics, found in an alley, unidentified. The charge nurse, terrified, pointed a shaking finger toward the elevators. "Surgical ICU, 5th floor. They took him up this morning." Upstairs in the surgical intensive care unit, Nolan Croft slowly opened his eyes. The pain was a white-hot blinding force, but it was anchored by the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside him. He blinked against the harsh lighting, his mind piecing together the fragmented memories of the night before. The ambush at the shipyard, the sudden betrayal, the feeling of the blade sliding between his ribs, the cold water of the alley, the darkness pulling him under. And then a voice, a woman's voice, steady and fierce. "Stay with me. Come back." The door to his ICU room opened, and Dr. Simon Gregory stepped in, a chart tucked under his arm. He looked exceptionally pleased with himself. When he saw that his patient was awake, his smile widened. He had realized a few hours ago, after fingerprinting by the police, exactly who the John Doe was. The realization had nearly given Gregory a heart attack, followed by an intense rush of opportunistic greed. "Mr. Croft," Dr. Gregory said, his voice dripping with syrupy warmth, "it is an absolute miracle you are awake. I am Dr. Simon Gregory, the attending trauma physician. We had quite a scare last night. When you were brought in, your condition was catastrophic. But I immediately initiated a massive transfusion protocol and stayed by your side through the night. I am very pleased to say my intervention saved your life." Nolan didn't speak immediately. He looked at the doctor, his sharp, dark eyes assessing the man's perfectly styled hair, his pristine white coat. Then the heavy doors of the ICU swung open. Dominic Rousseau stepped into the room, his face a mask of stone. He walked to the side of the bed, looking down at his boss. "Nate," Dominic said softly. "Who did it?" "O'Bannon's crew," Nolan rasped, his voice raw and ragged from the breathing tube that had been removed hours earlier. "They knew the meeting location. We have a leak." Dominic nodded once. "It will be handled before sunset." Dominic then turned his cold gaze toward Dr. Gregory. "The hospital administrator tells me you are the man who saved him. The Croft family owes you a debt, Doctor." Gregory puffed out his chest, unable to hide his smug satisfaction. "It was entirely my duty. I recognized the severity of his condition instantly and took decisive, immediate action." Nolan closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the cold emergency room. He remembered the agonizing pain, the feeling of slipping away. But most importantly, he remembered the argument. His hearing had been the last thing to fade. He remembered a man's voice, arrogant and dismissive, ordering saline for a hopeless case. And he remembered the woman who had fought for him, the woman who had defied orders to pump life back into his veins. Nolan opened his eyes and looked directly at Dr. Gregory. The billionaire's gaze was not grateful. It was terrifyingly cold. "You're a liar," Nolan whispered. Gregory's smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me, Mr. Croft?" "You wanted to give me saline," Nolan said, the words slow but carrying an immense, undeniable weight. "You called me a transient. You walked away." Gregory took a step back, the blood draining from his face just as it had when he caught Abigail in Bay 4. "Mr. Croft, you were in severe shock. You were hallucinating. The trauma can cause auditory illusions." "There was a nurse," Nolan interrupted, turning his head slightly to look at Dominic. "A woman. She's the one who gave the blood. Find her." Dominic pulled out his phone, his eyes never leaving the trembling doctor. "What is her name, Dr. Gregory?" Gregory swallowed hard, beads of sweat breaking out on his forehead. He realized with a sudden, crushing certainty that his career was evaporating before his eyes. "Her name is Abigail Linville," he stammered. "Go get her, Dominic," Nolan commanded softly. "I can't do that, Nate," Dominic said, reading a text that had just come through from his men downstairs. "She's not here." "Why not?" Dominic looked at Gregory with a stare that promised absolute ruin. "Because Dr. Gregory fired her last night for saving your life." Afternoon shadows stretched across the peeling linoleum of Abigail's cramped kitchen, offering no comfort to the woman sitting at the small, wobbly dining table. Spread out before her were the fragments of her life. Overdue utility bills, the staggering monthly invoice for her mother's assisted living facility, and a fresh, devastating email printed on cheap paper. The Illinois State Board of Nursing had not just received a complaint. They had issued an emergency suspension of her license. Abigail stared at the words until they blurred. Dr. Simon Gregory had not merely fired her for insubordination. To ensure she could never challenge his narrative, he had escalated the lie. The official report claimed she was suspected of working under the influence and had misappropriated Schedule 4 narcotics during the chaos of the trauma resuscitation. It was a career death sentence. He was burying her to protect his own pristine reputation. A sharp, authoritative knock at her apartment door pulled her from her spiraling panic. She wiped her eyes, expecting the landlord or perhaps a process server. When she unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open, she found herself staring at the broad chest of a man in a flawless charcoal suit. Two other men stood on the landing behind him, their posture radiating a quiet, dangerous vigilance. "Abigail Linville?" the man asked. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice tight, instinctively tightening her grip on the door handle. "If you're from the hospital's legal department, I have nothing to say to you without an attorney." Dominic Rousseau offered a polite, surprisingly gentle smile that did not quite reach his cold eyes. "I am not a lawyer, Ms. Linville. My name is Dominic Rousseau. I work for the man you saved last night in Bay 4. Abigail blinked, her defensiveness faltering for a fraction of a second. "The John Doe? Did he make it through surgery?" "He did," Dominic answered. "Thanks entirely to you. My employer is Nolan Croft. He is currently awake, recovering in the surgical ECU, and he is extremely displeased to learn that the woman who kept him breathing was terminated and slandered by a coward in a white coat." The name hit Abigail like a physical blow. Nolan Croft. Even nurses working the graveyard shift knew that name. He was a titan of Chicago industry, a man whose legitimate businesses generated billions, and whose private dealings were whispered about in hushed, terrified tones. She hadn't just saved a random victim of street violence. She had saved the head of the city's most formidable syndicate. "I appreciate the update," Abigail said cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. "But I can't be associated with him. My license is already suspended because of what I did. I have a hearing in a week, and if I don't figure out a way to prove Dr. Gregory lied, I am going to lose everything." Dominic didn't move. He reached inside his suit jacket and produced a thick manila envelope, offering it to her. "Dr. Gregory's lies are already unravelling, Ms. Linville. Inside this envelope is the hospital's internal pharmacy log, time-stamped from last night. It proves no narcotics were removed from the dispensary during your shift. There's also an affidavit from the blood bank resident confirming you initiated a massive transfusion protocol, not a narcotics withdrawal. Abigail stared at the envelope, too stunned to take it. How did you get this? The hospital network is heavily encrypted. Mr. Croft has a vested interest in the truth, Dominic replied smoothly. And he has an even greater interest in loyalty. He owes you his life. He requested that I bring you back to Memorial Presbyterian immediately. The hospital board of directors has convened an emergency session regarding last night's incident. They are currently listening to Dr. Gregory spin his fairy tale. Mr. Croft thinks it is time they heard from you. I was banned from the property, Abigail whispered. Security will arrest me the second I step through the doors. Dominic's expression hardened into something terrifyingly absolute. Nobody in that building will lay a finger on you. You have the protection of the Croft family now. Grab your coat, Ms. Linville, we have a doctor to fire. 20 minutes later, Abigail sat in the back of a luxury SUV, watching the Chicago skyline blur past the tinted windows. The rain had intensified, washing the slick streets in a grey gloom, but inside the vehicle, the tension was electric. She felt a bizarre mixture of sheer terror and absolute vindication. She was walking back into the lion's den, but this time she brought the alpha with her. Executive Boardroom B on the 12th floor of Memorial Presbyterian smelled of lemon polish, expensive cologne, and corporate anxiety. Around the massive mahogany table sat the hospital's top administrators, legal counsel, and the chief of staff. At the head of the table stood Dr. Simon Gregory, wearing a perfectly pressed suit, delivering a passionate, utterly fabricated monologue. And so, faced with a severely compromised patient and an erratic, hostile nurse who was clearly under the influence of illicit substances, I had no choice but to forcefully intervene. Gregory lied seamlessly, pacing before the board. I personally stabilized the patient, initiated the blood protocols, and arranged for the emergency surgical consult. Nurse Linville's subsequent termination and the board complaint were unfortunate, but entirely necessary steps to protect this institution from massive liability. The chief administrator, a balding man named Richard Vance, nodded gravely. "Thank you, Dr. Gregory. Your swift action in saving Mr. Croft will not be forgotten. The hospital is lucky to have you. We will ensure the nursing board revokes her license permanently so this doesn't become a public relations nightmare." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom suddenly slammed open with enough force to crack the drywall. The room fell into a dead, terrified silence. Dominic Rousseau strode into the room, flanked by 4 men who immediately positioned themselves at the exits. The board members froze, recognizing the threat instantly, though few recognized the man himself. "Security!" Richard Vance shouted, half rising from his leather chair. "How did you get up here?" "Security is currently taking a mandatory coffee break on the ground floor," Dominic said, his voice a low, echoing baritone that commanded absolute obedience. He stepped aside, allowing Abigail Linville to walk into the room. She wore jeans and a simple wool coat, her hands trembling slightly, but she kept her chin high. When Dr. Gregory saw her, all the colour drained from his face, leaving him looking like a polished corpse. "What is the meaning of this?" Gregory demanded, his voice cracking. "Get this woman out of here. She is suspended." Dominic ignored him. He walked straight to the boardroom table and dropped a sleek black laptop in the centre. He opened it, tapped a few keys, and the large projector screen at the end of the room flared to life. The image of Nolan Croft appeared on the screen. He was sitting up in his ICU bed, oxygen tubing resting beneath his nose, looking pale but profoundly dangerous. The sheer intensity in his dark eyes made the executives shrink back in their chairs. "Gentlemen," Nolan's voice rasped through the boardroom speakers, rough and heavy. "I understand you are having a meeting regarding my medical care. I thought I should attend." "Mr. Croft," Richard Vance stammered, sweating profusely. "We are honoured. We were just commending Dr. Gregory for his heroic actions and saving your life last night." "Dr. Gregory is a parasite," Nolan stated flatly, the words cutting through the room like a scalpel. "He took one look at my clothes, assumed I was destitute, and ordered a lethal course of saline. He left me to die so he could tend to a VIP's headache. The only reason I have breath in my lungs is because Nurse Linville broke protocol, stole the blood I needed, and fought for my life." Dr. Gregory gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "Mr. Croft, you were in hypervolemic shock. You don't remember the events clearly. This woman is a drug addict who—" "Shut your mouth," Nolan commanded softly. The room went instantly silent. Nolan looked through the camera, his gaze locking onto the hospital administrator. "Richard, the Croft Syndicate owns the primary investment firm that holds Memorial Presbyterian's operational debt. I fund your trauma center. I fund your new oncology wing. And as of this morning, I am calling in my markers." The executives exchanged panicked glances. They were completely cornered. "Here are my terms," Nolan continued, leaning closer to the camera. "First, Dr. Simon Gregory is terminated immediately. You will report his medical negligence and his falsified pharmacy logs to the State Medical Board today. If he ever practices medicine in this state again, I will personally hold this board responsible." Gregory collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was ruined. "Second," Nolan said, his eyes shifting to Abigail, who stood silently near the door. "Nurse Linville's suspension is to be eradicated from the record. Furthermore, she is to be offered the position of Chief Director of Trauma Nursing, with a salary that reflects the fact that she is the only person in this building with a spine." Richard Vance nodded furiously, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Yes, of course, Mr. Croft. We will draw up the paperwork immediately. It was all a terrible misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Abigail spoke up, her voice ringing clear and steady in the quiet room. She looked directly at Richard Vance, then at the camera. "Mr. Croft, I appreciate your intervention, but I won't take the promotion." Dominic turned to look at her, surprised. On the screen, Nolan raised an eyebrow. "I don't want to run a department for a hospital that prioritizes wealth over human life," Abigail explained, her gaze shifting to the broken doctor sitting at the table. "I became a nurse to save people, whether they wear custom suits or rags. This hospital's policies allow doctors like Gregory to let people die based on their insurance status. I won't be a part of it." A slow, genuine smile spread across Nolan Croft's face. It was the first time Dominic had seen him smile in months. "I completely agree, Ms. Linville," Nolan said, "which is why I am buying this hospital. As of next week, Memorial Presbyterian will be restructured. The Croft Foundation is taking over the board. We are turning this facility into a Level 1 trauma center dedicated to providing elite care to everyone in the West Side, regardless of their ability to pay." He paused, letting the magnitude of the statement sink into the terrified executives. "And I need someone with unshakable morals to run it. The offer stands, Abigail. Director of Nursing. You write the new protocols. Will you take the job?" Abigail looked around the room. She saw the defeated executives, the ruined doctor who tried to destroy her, and the men in suits who had unexpectedly become her champions. She had risked everything for a complete stranger, and in return, she had been given the power to change the system from the inside out. She stood a little taller, a fierce, triumphant light in her eyes. "I'll take it," Abigail said, "but my first protocol is that Dr. Gregory is escorted off the property by security, immediately." Dominic Russo chuckled softly, stepping forward to grip the back of Dr. Gregory's chair. "It would be my absolute pleasure. What would you do if you had to choose between your career and saving a life?" Abigail's incredible bravery proves that sometimes breaking the rules is the only right choice. If this real-life medical drama kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true stories of everyday heroes. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.